Okay, so let's unpack this.
Right.
When you think about, a turning point in history, your mind immediately goes to the big stuff, right? A battle, a treaty being signed.
The things you read about in textbooks.
Okay.
The headline events.
Exactly, the massive public events. But sometimes history is, well, it's better understood through a different kind of metaphor, something more powerful, but slower.
That's the damn metaphor.
That's the one. Think of history as this massive concrete structure, and the water rising behind it, that's the pressure. It represents decades of political buildup, technological change, legal maneuvering, all this tension.
And that pressure just mounts and mounts year after year, almost silently.
Absolutely. But the crack in the concrete, the single sudden moment that finally bursts and, changes the entire landscape.
It happens in a flash.
In seconds. And it usually happens far away from the public eye, behind the closed doors of a tense boardroom.
And for today's deep dive, that rising water, that immense crushing pressure, that was the full weight of the U.S. government bearing down on the most powerful company the world had ever seen.
American Telephone and Telegraph, AT&T.
La Belle. The pressure started building in 1949 when the government basically decided to take a sledgehammer to the entire Bell system.
But the crack we're focusing on today, the really counterintuitive decision that released all that pressure and sent history spinning into the digital age.
That happened in a quiet office in New Jersey, late 1951.
And what was that crack? It was the voluntary, proactive decision by AT&T to give away the single most valuable piece of intellectual property of the 20th century.
The patent for the transistor.
It sounds unbelievable.
It is. And our mission today is to trace that incredible causal chain. We are going to connect a high-stakes, corporate legal defense strategy from 1951 directly to the hyper-connected digital world that is, right now, operating the very device you're using to listen to us.
And what's so wild, what's genuinely surprising here, is that our entire modern reality, Silicon Valley, the internet, your smartphone, it was all essentially an accidental byproduct.
An accidental byproduct of a corporation's frantic effort to dodge an existential antitrust lawsuit.
So we're going to structure this deep dive in 3 parts. First, we'll examine the dam itself, the colossal power of AT&T, the environment that created both the pressure and the breakthrough technology.
Then we'll zoom in on that fulcrum moment, late 1951, where the choice was made.
And finally, we'll analyze the flood of consequences that followed, because it really proves just how razor-thin the margin was for our modern world to even exist.
To even get your head around that 1951 decision, you have to start with the sheer monolithic scale of AT&T in the mid-20th century.
It's hard to even comprehend now.
It is. This wasn't just a large corporation. People called it Ma Bell. And it was, for all intents and purposes, a nationalized utility that just happened to be operating under private ownership.
Exactly. Calling it a company it feels insufficient. It was a vertically integrated quasi-governmental system.
And that term, vertical integration, is key.
It really is. It wasn't just that they offered the phone service. They controlled every single facet of communication in the United States, the entire supply chain.
From the raw materials to the research to the final signal hitting your earpiece.
So what did that actually look like?
Well, it operated on 3 main pillars, and controlling all 3 is what gave them this perfect, unshakable monopoly.
Okay, so pillar number 1.
First, you had Western Electric. This was the immense manufacturing arm. And I mean immense.
They built everything.
Literally everything. The physical telephones themselves, the miles and miles of copper wire, the incredibly complex switching equipment that routed every single call in the country.
So if you picked up a phone in, say, 1950, Western Electric made the device, the wire it was connected to, and the machine that connected your call.
100%. Okay, so second pillar. The regional Bell operating companies.
The local monopolies.
The local monopolies, exactly.
Yeah.
They handled the lines, the installation, and they employed every single one of those operators who would say, "Number, please." They were the distribution and service network.
Right. The public-facing part of the machine.
And then the third pillar, the intellectual engine, the brain driving the entire system.
Bell Laboratories.
Bell Labs. John Gertner, in his work on this era, he called it a cathedral of science.
And that phrase is just, it's perfect. It's so apt.
It is, because it speaks to the isolation and really the sanctity of the work that was being done there.
I think we need to just pause on the funding model for a second, because it's pure genius. And it directly explains why they were so successful and also why they were so legally exposed.
Oh, absolutely. This is the secret sauce.
Bell Labs wasn't funded by, venture capital or some quarterly R&D budget that could get slashed.
No. It was funded by a tiny, almost invisible slice of every single phone call made in America.
Every single call.
Think about that. That stable, constant, unending stream of revenue was the key.
It completely insulated them from commercial pressure.
Completely. Their job wasn't to invent a product for next quarter's catalog. It wasn't about the fastest path to market. Their job was to perfect the network.
Which meant thinking long term.
Not just long term, 10, 20, even 50 years into the future. It was about fundamental science.
It created this environment, this sanctuary for science, as the head of Bell Labs called it. A place where physicists and researchers could pursue pure science without worrying if it would sell next week.
This kind of long-term fundamental research, totally insulated from the noise of the market. It's the only reason the transistor could have been invented there in the first place.
No other company could afford it.
No typical competitive corporation could afford to maintain that kind of research environment. It wouldn't make sense to the shareholders.
But, and this is the big but, this perfection, this incredible engine of innovation, it came at a steep political and legal cost.
Right. Their culture was deeply, deeply insular.
Because why wouldn't it be? They were a protected monopoly.
Exactly. So sharing technology was just.
Yeah.
It was antithetical to their entire business model. Their world was closed, complete, and utterly controlled.
And it was all designed to maintain system reliability above everything else.
Which meant that if you were an innovator in communications in the U.S., you had to go through Mabel. And Mabel had every incentive to stifle any external competition that might jeopardize their perfected closed systems.
And that absolute dominance, that complete vertical integration from the lab to the living room, that's precisely what finally drove the government to file suit.
Yeah. They looked at the genius coming out of Bell Labs, backed by the Western Electric manufacturing machine, and they didn't just see innovation.
They saw a massive, intractable threat to the free market.
Which brings us to the sword of Damocles, part two of this pressure cooker. AT&T's entire existence, their whole monopoly, it relied on the continued, often unspoken approval of the U.S. government.
A kind of political truce.
A truce, exactly. And that truce, it vanished on January 14, 1949.
That's the date. That's when the U.S. Department of Justice filed its sweeping antitrust lawsuit against AT&T.
And we have to be clear, this was not a regulatory slap on the wrist. It wasn't a fine.
No. Our sources describe it as an earthquake moment. It was an immediate, existential declaration of war.
The goal was brutal. It was non-negotiable. It was the total dismantling the Bell system.
The government wasn't just trying to modify a business practice. They wanted to fundamentally restructure American communications from the ground up.
And their primary demand focused on that first pillar we mentioned, Western Electric.
They insisted AT&T sell off its crucial manufacturing arm. Why was that so vital to the government's case?
Because without Western Electric, AT&T couldn't control the price, the supply, or the quality of the equipment needed to run the network.
So they'd have to buy from other companies.
They were accused of abusing that control to squeeze out any smaller, innovative equipment manufacturers. If the government could sever Western Electric, they'd be forcing AT&T to buy components from external competitors.
Instantly injecting competition into this perfectly closed system.
Exactly. So cutting off that manufacturing limb was economically crippling. But for the leadership at Bell Labs, the threat was even deeper. It was intellectual.
It was an attack on the very idea of Bell Labs.
Absolutely. For the president of Bell Labs, a man named Mervin Kelly, the true existential threat was that the government wanted to tear the brain Bell Labs from the body AT&T.
They wanted to force this incredible research institution to operate out in the open, in the commercial market.
And Kelly knew what that meant. He knew it was the death of his sanctuary for science.
It would force them to chase short-term, profitable inventions.
It would completely destroy the long-term, pure science research culture that had produced all of the company's greatest achievements. He saw the government threatening to burn his institution as cathedral to the ground.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the lawsuit created this immediate and really terrible paradox.
Yes. Every single scientific triumph that came out of their lab at Murray Hill.
It immediately became a legal liability.
The more powerful, the more brilliant Bell Labs appeared, the more easily the government lawyers could stand up in court and prove monopolistic dominance.
And Mervin Kelly was sitting on the biggest, most brilliant liability in human history.
The transistor.
It had been invented a couple of years earlier, right?
Right. The first successful demonstration of the point-contact transistor had happened back in December of '47. This tiny, solid-state amplifier was proof positive of Bell Labs' unique, world-changing genius. It was their crown jewel.
Wait a minute. So you're saying the very invention that proved AT&T was the unparalleled leader in technology also became the chief piece of evidence that the government could use to break them up? That is an incredible double-edged sword.
It's the definition of it. I mean, think about what it replaced. The vacuum tube?
Right. Big, glass, hot.
They were bulky, they were fragile, they consumed massive amounts of power, and they generated intense heat. The transistor solved all of those problems instantly.
It was small.
Tiny. It required negligible power, produced very little heat, and it was incredibly reliable. It was an invention that rendered entire existing technologies obsolete practically overnight.
So it was proof of their genius.
But also undeniable evidence of their immense monopolistic dominance. They had control of the present, the phone network, and now they had the exclusive rights to the future.
It's interesting, though, that it didn't make a huge splash at first.
No, it's fascinating. The sources note the initial public announcement in June of '48 was met with little fanfare. The press coverage was muted.
So nobody really got it yet.
Nobody outside the most cutting-edge physics and engineering labs truly grasped its staggering exponential potential. But Kelly and his chief engineer, Jack Morton, they absolutely did.
They understood. They saw that this little thing could replace every bulky, fragile vacuum tube in the world.
And they knew that a monopoly holding the undisputed key to the next technological age would simply never, ever be allowed to survive politically in America.
The crown jewel was getting heavy.
It was threatening to pull the entire system under, right into the middle of this courtroom chaos.
And this is where we transition. This is the fulcrum moment. The scene shifts to Murray Hill, New Jersey in the final, incredibly tense weeks of 1951.
You can just imagine the atmosphere. The air was thick with political and legal anxiety.
And Mervin Kelly, the president of Bell Labs, he wasn't just a corporate executive, was he?
No, not at all. He was primarily a physicist. He was an institution builder. He was watching all this legal maneuvering with, frankly, horror.
Yeah.
He knew the lawyers were treating his lab's scientific triumphs as mere bargaining chips.
And the sources really emphasize this point. His primary loyalty wasn't necessarily to maximizing AT&T's stock price that quarter.
No, his loyalty was to the survival of Bell Labs' unique research environment. He was loyal to the idea of this protected R&D, not just the monopoly structure that enabled it.
So the legal pressure is intense. And the conventional path, the standard playbook for any corporation facing this kind of threat, it's obvious, right?
It's obvious. You fight tooth and nail.
The lawyers and the executives are all insisting on hoarding the patent, using the transistor as the greatest piece of leverage they have in the court proceedings.
It's the logical, most profitable path. It's what any normal company that had spent decades perfecting its monopoly would do.
But Kelly proposes the unthinkable.
The strategic sacrifice. He, working very closely with engineers like Jack Morton, starts to argue that they should do the complete opposite of what their own legal team is recommending.
He wants to give it away.
He wants to license the patent, cheaply and broadly, immediately, to reframe the entire corporate narrative.
Hold on, a $25,000 fee for the patent of the century? That sounds less like a strategic surrender and more like corporate malpractice.
It does.
Weren't there massive internal battles over this? I mean, they were talking about giving away what was effectively trillions of dollars in future revenue.
Well, there absolutely were. You have to imagine those meetings. Kelly could argue against a mountain of legal precedent and pure corporate self-interest.
So what was his rationale? How did he convince them?
The rationale, as historians Riordan and Hodison document, was brilliant and totally counterintuitive. This was a calculated act of corporate disarmament.
Disarmament to demonstrate good faith.
Exactly. They wanted to prove to the Department of Justice, and just as importantly, to the court of public opinion, that AT&T was a national benefactor.
That they were actively seeding a new American industry.
Rather than being a jealous hoarder of critical technology, which was, of course, the central claim of the entire antitrust suit.
So it was a PR move, but with the highest possible stakes.
If a leader who was focused purely on maximizing quarterly profits or, winning the legal war at any cost had been in charge, that patent would have been locked in a vault.
It would have been buried under legal injunctions for years.
For a decade or more. The digital revolution would have been held hostage to litigation. The sources make it crystal clear that the speed of the world we live in today exists because of Kelly's unusual long-term priorities.
He believed that protecting Bell Labs was synonymous with serving the national interest.
He did. And this is the critical juncture. This is the razor's edge where history almost went the other way, and we have to correct this central misconception that still colors this entire story.
Okay, this is important.
Yes. Most people, even those who are familiar with the story, they believe the wrong idea.
Which is?
That the 1956 consent decree, the final legal settlement, forced AT&T to license the transistor patent as a penalty for being a monopoly.
And that narrative, it's simple, but it's fundamentally incorrect.
It is. And it diminishes the agency, the drama, of this pivotal moment. The right fact is this. The decision to license the patent to all interested companies was made voluntarily in late 1951.
Years before the settlement.
That time difference, those 5 critical years, that's everything. This was a proactive strategy.
So the licensing wasn't the consequence of the lawsuit?
No, it was a preemptive move designed specifically to neutralize the government's primary argument. It was meant to influence the final outcome of the lawsuit.
Which in the end was settled pretty favorably for AT&T in 1956.
It was. By acting like this national benefactor and opening up the technology, Kelly essentially bought immunity for his most prized asset, Bell Labs.
He ensured its core research model survived intact.
Even while he had to concede that their manufacturing monopoly, Western Electric, would face new restrictions.
Had they waited? Had they waited for the courts to force their hand in '56?
The transistor would have been locked in legal limbo. It would have slowed diffusion to a crawl during the most critical innovation period.
But by making that voluntary decision in late 1951, Kelly essentially hit the starting gun on the information age.
Years ahead of any legal mandate.
But Kelly and Morton, they were smart enough to realize that simply handing out a piece of paper, a patent license, that wasn't enough.
Right. It wasn't enough to prove good faith, and it wasn't enough to truly accelerate the technology. You couldn't just throw the patent over the fence and declare victory.
Why not?
Because the transistor was brand new science. It wasn't just a matter of reading a document. Manufacturing these devices required an intimate understanding of the art of semiconductor fabrication.
You mean like the hands-on techniques?
The delicate chemical purification of materials like germanium, the precise environmental controls, the subtle physics of the process. They had to teach the world the grammar and the art of how to build one.
Which brings us to part 4. The floodgates open. This is where the technological secrets pour out of that cathedral of science and into the hands of their future competitors.
Kelly and Morton decided to turn their labs into a classroom.
And the first step was for the military, wasn't it?
That's right. The initial move, already taken under this intense pressure, happened in September of 1951. Bell Labs held a closed symposium specifically for the military.
Why them first?
Well, the Pentagon and the defense establishment needed reliable, rugged, solid-state components. Things that wouldn't fail in a vibrating plane or a ship at sea, which fragile vacuum tubes were famous for doing.
So this demonstrated the national security angle of the technology, another point in their favor with the government.
Yeah, exactly. But the real game changer, the moment that sparked the commercial revolution, was the legendary 1952 Transistor Technology Symposium.
This was open to everyone.
Well, not everyone, but it was an intense, groundbreaking event. It spanned 8 days from April 17th to the 26th, 1952.
And who was there?
It wasn't an exclusive club. Representatives from about 40 different companies, a mix of established competitors and some brand new upstarts, they all gathered at the Murray Hill facility.
And here we come back to that number that just seems almost laughably low in retrospect.
The $25,000 fee.
A comprehensive, non-exclusive license to use the revolutionary transistor patent cost a mere $25,000.
And that fee is so critical for understanding the strategy. As you said earlier, it looks like corporate malpractice if you're just looking at profit.
Right.
But the sources emphasize this was a deliberate choice. For a massive corporation like AT&T, the total revenue they'd get from these fees, even if every company paid up, was negligible. A rounding error.
So the goal was not profit.
The goal was regulatory appeasement through widespread adoption. They were paying a kind of legal insurance premium. They were signaling to the Department of Justice, look, we are not hoarding this future-defining technology.
We are actively making it the foundation of a new American industry, and look how cheap we're making it.
And what the attendees got for their money was just exponentially more valuable than that fee.
Oh, absolutely. The Bell Labs scientists, including the inventors themselves, stood up and revealed every single secret.
They held nothing back.
Nothing.
Ah.
They went into excruciating detail on the most complex processes, how to purify germanium crystals to parts per billion purity, the precise art of fabricating the point contact and junction transistors.
The complex physics of how solid-state amplification actually work.
It was the intellectual equivalent of handing over the keys to the future.
And the attendees, they didn't just listen to a few lectures and take notes.
No, they walked away with a tangible, massive giveaway. A thick, densely packed volume of technical data. It detailed every single facet of the technology.
This was the book.
This was the book. Officially, it was titled The Transistor, selected reference material on characteristics and applications.
But it instantly became the foundational text for the entire burgeoning semiconductor industry.
And it quickly earned a nickname that just perfectly encapsulated its role.
Ma Bell's Cookbook.
Ma Bell's Cookbook. It was the definitive step-by-step recipe for manufacturing the information age. And it was distributed essentially for free to the very companies that AT&T had just been fighting in court.
And we know this worked, right? I mean, economic studies have looked at this.
They have. An analysis of patent diffusion and economic impact confirms just how revolutionary this was. Studies argue that the combination of the low-cost patent license plus the active teaching,
The cookbook,
and the symposia, that detailed knowledge transfer was far more critical to the technology's explosive diffusion and all the innovation that followed than the low royalty rate alone.
So they didn't just give away the right to try.
No, they gave away the guaranteed roadmap for success.
So just imagine being an engineer from some small company, walking into that room and realizing that the most powerful research institution on Earth just handed you the definitive, step-by-step blueprint for building the next generation of electronics.
And among those listeners were representatives from a small, ambitious radio equipment company based in Dallas.
Texas Instruments.
And this brings us directly into Part 5, the accidental seeding of Silicon Valley.
Because Kelly voluntarily opened that technological seed, it was just scattered on the wind.
Yeah.
And it took root far, far away from the carefully manicured corporate lawn of New Jersey.
Texas Instruments immediately saw the opportunity that AT&T, which was still shackled by its own methodical, slow priorities, was totally ignoring.
Right, AT&T was thinking about the phone network.
Only the phone network.
Yeah.
So TI attended the symposium, they studied Mayor Bell's cookbook, and they targeted a market completely separate from that massive national system.
The consumer market.
The consumer market. Their key product was the first commercially viable transistor radio, which they introduced in 1954.
And this was a paradigm shift.
A huge one. Suddenly, this complex laboratory curiosity became accessible. It became portable. And it became cheap enough for the masses.
This was the first true mass market for the transistor.
And it drove down production costs through volume manufacturing. It created the commercial engine that the revolution desperately needed to get going.
So while Texas Instruments proved the commercial viability, the truly pivotal consequence, the one that reshaped the entire geography of innovation, it's centered on the key inventor himself.
William Shockley.
Because the technology was now licensed far and wide for just $25,000.
Shockley was completely untethered from the Bell system. He could leave.
What kind of a figure was he?
He was complex, an undeniable visionary, a Nobel laureate, but also notoriously volatile and incredibly difficult to work with.
So before 1951, he had to be at Bell Labs.
He had to be. That was the only place where the science was being done and, more importantly, where the patents were held. But now the foundational knowledge was open.
The center of gravity for innovation could be anywhere.
Anywhere. So in 1956, Shockley leaves the protective, stable sanctuary of Bell Labs. He moves west.
Not back to New Jersey.
No. He moves to Mountain View, California to start his own venture, Shockley Semiconductor Laboratory. He brought with him the reputation, the deep expertise, and all that foundational knowledge from Bell Labs.
Why California?
The decision was strategic. He's near military funding and procurement centers out on the West Coast. But the ultimate irony of history unfolded very quickly.
His management style.
His abrasive and often paranoid management style quickly drove away his most talented young recruits.
And here's the crucial link. The direct connection back to that $25,000 decision.
This is it. because the core transistor technology was legally accessible to anyone for that token fee.
Those brilliant disgruntled employees could just leave.
They could leave and start their own company using the exact same foundational knowledge they had learned at Bell Labs and then refined under Shockley. They weren't blocked by monopolistic patent control.
This leads to the famous defection in 1957.
The traitorous eight. 8 of Shockley's brightest engineers, just fed up with his management, they walked out and founded Fairchild Semiconductor.
And the very existence, the immediate viability of Fairchild, which would go on to build the future of microchips,
Was only possible because the door to the underlying technology had been flung wide open years earlier by Mervin Kelly's defensive move.
And that single defection, the founding of Fairchild, it became the single most important event in the birth of the West Coast tech industry.
It's not an exaggeration. Fairchild became the mother company. Engineers and executives from Fairchild would spin off to found Intel, AMD, National Semiconductor.
Dozens of other key companies.
Dozens. And just like that, a sleepy agricultural valley known primarily for its fruit orchards and a naval air station.
It acquired a new, permanent, and definitive name, Silicon Valley.
It is the ultimate profound irony.
A meticulous legal strategy designed in a boardroom in New Jersey to protect an Eastern monopoly.
Accidentally planted the seeds for its greatest future competitors, and an entire new, decentralized innovation culture thousands of miles away in California.
The whole ecosystem we know today, the culture of rapid iteration, intense competition, the movement of talented people from company to company, it was all born from an act of corporate disarmament meant to appease antitrust regulators.
That is a truly dynamic and frankly surprising foundation for the digital world.
We really need to step back now and reflect on what this accidental history implies. This is what you call the fragility thesis.
Right.
And the core insight is so profound, we have to stress this again, our modern, hyper-connected digital world. It wasn't the inevitable result of some grand vision or a master plan.
Not at all. It was the unintended, accidental byproduct of one of the world's most powerful corporations, AT&T, trying desperately to dodge a lawsuit that was filed back in 1949.
It shows that history doesn't always turn on massive public spectacles or, grand philosophical debates.
Sometimes it hinges entirely on a single, highly calculated, counterintuitive choice made under immense, immediate pressure by an individual.
By Mervin Kelly.
By Mervin Kelly. And to really feel the weight of that, we have to consider the alternative. We have to look at the ghost of a slower future.
Okay, let's play this out. Let's imagine Kelly had made the logical decision. The NBA approved standard legal decision in late 1951.
He decides to fight. He locks the patent down, uses it as leverage, and refuses to license it cheaply. What happens?
In that alternate timeline, the transistor patent remains the exclusive property of AT&T for a prolonged period.
For a decade, maybe more, tied up in litigation and market domination. So its development would be entirely shackled to the priorities of the Bell system.
And we know what those priorities were: slow, methodical, reliable.
And focused solely on improving the massive national phone network. They had no commercial interest in small, cheap consumer electronics.
So therefore, there would be no race for miniaturization.
Why would there be? Transistors would remain prohibitively expensive. They'd be exotic components used only for highly specialized, large-scale switching systems for AT&T and maybe some military applications.
They wouldn't be mass-produced.
No mass consumer market ever ignites. No transistor radio breaks the price barrier.
And William Shockley, he never leaves for California in 1956.
Why would he? The only place on Earth where cutting-edge, patent-protected transistor research is allowed is still Bell Labs in New Jersey. The technology remains completely centralized.
Which means no Shockley Semiconductor.
Which means no traitorous 8 defection. No Fairchild Semiconductor.
And critically, no Intel, no AMD, none of the dozens of other companies that spun off from that initial breach.
The entire chain of competitive innovation is broken at its source.
The name Silicon Valley never exists. It just stays an agricultural region.
The explosion of creativity, of competition, of relentless miniaturization that defined the late 20th century, microchip boom that drove costs down exponentially. It's all stillborn.
So in that world, what do computers look like?
The computers that drive our lives remain room-sized behemoths. They're owned only by governments and massive corporations. Their power is rationed, accessible only to a select few.
And the internet.
The internet, if it develops at all, is centralized. It's slow, and it's controlled entirely by one monopoly, AT&T. The open, chaotic, decentralized web that we take for granted. It's utterly unthinkable.
So the entire ecosystem of innovation, the very idea of a startup culture born from a shared technological platform, it's just gone.
Fundamentally gone. Our reality, the device you are holding or wearing right now, is a direct, if accidental, consequence of that singular decision.
To give away the crown jewel for a token fee of $25,000.
And just as importantly, the accompanying technical knowledge detailed inside Maybell's cookbook.
It is the ultimate paradox of corporate strategy.
It is. AT&T technically won the legal battle. The lawsuit was settled favorably in 1956, and Bell Labs' core research model survived intact for decades longer.
But the war for the future, the war for technological supremacy, that was decisively won by the rivals and the rebels they had just empowered.
Empowered through their own act of disarmament.
They successfully protected their kingdom, yes. But in doing so, they inadvertently created an entire new world of decentralized, hyper-competitive technological disruption.
A world that eventually left their slow, methodical infrastructure completely in the dust.
This accidental democratization of technology is arguably the single most consequential corporate decision in modern history.
It's a powerful lesson. That context and strategy and individual foresight matter so much more than we often attribute to them in the broad sweep of history.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other invisible hinges is our world turning on right now, hidden behind some legal filing or a corporate defense strategy that we haven't even registered yet?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the $25,000 key that unlocked the digital age.